The next question we have is actually put forward by one of the other partners for tonight's event, and that is the Centre of Excellence for Aboriginal Families Wellbeing. Question is, and we'll go in the order of Senator Cox, Senator Stewart and Senator Thorpe. Some of the Commonwealth key systems, for example, Centrelink, NDIS and aged care, are notoriously hard to access and navigate. I'm sure that's not news to any of you up here. How would you advocate for better social care systems, and what are your priorities that will help in this critical area of supporting Aboriginal families and keeping them together? Senator Cox.
Thank you, Uncle. One of the really critical things that we found during the Measuring Outcomes Committee is that everything is digital. You know, if you want to go on to go do something in Centrelink, you've got to get in MyGov. So they'll send you out of a Centrelink office now and go home and you can do it online. So digital access and the platforms have become the way of the future. And I can tell you that people can now upload ID. There's women in refuges who are quicker than anything because they're getting people come in and actually provide some of those key sort of learnings around how to do that. It's become a way of the future and using technology. But what I think our mob really need is going back to those family relationship centres, going back to that, walking alongside people, meeting people where they're at. And that's what we don't have. We don't have places where people can go into, and I know that places like VACCHO and all of our health services across the country end up then doing everything for mob. They get someone come to the counter and they go, well, I've got no ID, I've got no birth certificate, I've got to go and get my driver's licence. All of a sudden, they end up as the one-stop shop. And we need to get better at how we actually facilitate the social services of how we can get people access, but also to follow them through that process. What we don't do is allow people to have a warm referral to the next place. We just go, it's just down the road, go and see John or go and see this person or ring this number. And that's become a way of life. We palm people off, and I know mob don't do that in lots of places, and I've heard it works very well here in Victoria. People are actually taking time to do that. But across the country, we are seeing more and more of that services are not getting paid what they are capable of doing in the way that this seamless approach needs to be actually funded. So we need to get people from where they are to where they need to be. And the only way we're going to do that is exactly what Auntie Jill was saying, is actually funding that. And having places where people can go to. Having places that are culturally appropriate, that are trauma-informed, that actually can understand what people are dealing with. People in politics talk about a cost of living crisis like it's a thing over there in the corner. And yet, we are still living below the breadline. We are still seeing families that can't put a feed together, and that they are constantly being pushed from service, particularly inner city services, from one service to the next, and it's really sad. And that's just not NGO services, it's for-profit services. And I can only talk about in my home state, but I feel like this is across the country. Wherever I travel to, I hear these stories, and I think we need to get better. We need to have more focus on that, and one of the key things is that we need governments to do business differently. Our national priority reforms of this national agreement to close the gap are bullshit, but they actually are not being funded. They are not being funded to be adhered to. There's no transformational strategy. There is no additional funding for the Coalition of Peaks to do the job to negotiate for the money. And there is no way that government are transferring any power to any of us. They are just not doing it. And every year, the three of us will stand in the Senate and go, well, how crap is this? We are not closing the gap. And I am sick and tired of giving those speeches, to be honest, and it's the reason I triggered this select committee. And I'll continue to not just advocate, but scream and continue to ask questions every Senate estimates and make the bureaucrats accountable for their decision.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Stewart.
Thank you.
I don't know if you've heard Peter Dutton talk about his cuts to the public service that he wants to make. So he's talked about cutting 36,000 public service jobs. And these are the people in the positions in the public service that actually help people navigate their way through systems like Centrelink, like NDIS, like Medicare, like our visa system, which doesn't necessarily apply to our mob. But these are actually really important jobs and really relevant to this question. So when we come in, we put thousands of public servants back on the tools, and that has led to a 99% improvement in the response times for people. Now, that is a very practical thing that has happened when we invest in the public service. It feels like it might not affect you when you hear Peter Dutton talk about public servant cuts, but it absolutely does. And it means that you'll spend longer on the phone to Centrelink, longer on the phone to Medicare, longer on the phone to NDIS, because we don't have a public service that works for us. And they're so under-resourced that they actually can't get to you quick enough. That's the reality of what happens when we cut the public service and undervalue the public service. That's what happened over a 10-year period, and our government is working to rebuild the public service. And that has led to real outcomes for people when they have contact with those systems. The other thing that I would say is that I've lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Okay, so the other thing that I would say about, it'll come back to me in a second. The other thing that I would say about supporting our families is, I can rattle off all the things. Like we've created 1 million jobs in our first term of government. We've invested in 500 Aboriginal healthcare workers. We've done 150 psychology student placements, which are all really great things. One of the things that I suppose I'm particularly focused on is about the kind of broader narrative that exists out there about our mob, which is hugely deficit focused. And absolutely we need to be having a conversation about all the challenges that exist with our mob, because they are real and we see them every day, absolutely. But one of the things we don't hear about our mob is what we contribute to our economy. And we heard Uncle Bill talk about this actually when he did his welcome to country, talking about the economic gap that exists for our mob. And our mob contributes $16.1 billion in revenue to this country every year. Employ 116,000 people across the economy. That's pretty deadly. That is pretty deadly. So we are absolutely economic partners in this country, but people don't see that about us. Instead, what they see is the deficit. So one of the things that I've really been focused on is really trying to lift that narrative about who we are and what we contribute to the broader economy, because I think that's really important that people see us and hear about us doing those things in a real way, because we are our nation's first traders and innovators and entrepreneurs, and the country should absolutely know that about us.
Thanks, Senator. And Senator Thorpe, to you.
Thank you. Well, self-determination has to be the key to any service that we decide to have and how we decide to have it. If we don't self-determine what we need, how we want it, where we want it, then it's not going to work. Doesn't matter what service it is. So if you don't follow the principles of self-determination, then it simply won't work. And in terms of political footballs, John Howard bounced that ball in the Senate field and said, here you go, here's what closing the gap is for all of you people. It's always was and always will be a political football. Closing the gap is basically smoothing the dying pillow, because we are in a genocide. We are in the most sophisticated genocide in this country. I held a genocide inquiry that proves that this country is guilty of genocide against our people. The effects of genocide. To commit genocide, you have to take children from a race of people and give them to another race of people. Act of genocide. Destroy the land and the water. Act of genocide. Cause mental harm to a race of people. Act of genocide. Kill our people in custody. Act of genocide. Do you think that any government in their right mind is going to give us justice? It's a colonial occupation. Their masters are white masters that their only priority is the white supremacy of the parliament. Their priority will never be us. Doesn't matter how many black people you have in parliament, it's the government that decide. Dorinda's part of a small party. I'm an independent. The only people that can change our situation right now is the government, the Labor government. Next week we go back to Parliament. If they wanted a treaty, they could put the legislation on the table. Dorinda and I would support it. All the crossbench, most of the crossbench except for Hanson, would support it. Like, if they wanted to end deaths in custody, they would bring that next week and say, we're going to get all the state and territories together and we're going to remove hanging points. Do you think Mark Dreyfus, in any meeting I've had with him, wants to remove hanging points? We have hanging points in every prison right across this country. And our people are showing each other how to take their lives because they've had enough. So I'm not prancing around, I'm not here to make friends, I'm not running an election. So I'm here to tell you the hard truth, and that is, if Labor wanted to make things right for us, then they have a chance to do that. They've had 3 years to do it, and they haven't done it. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Senator. Auntie Jill?
Sorry, can I just,
Go for it.
before you respond, Auntie Jill, I just remembered a thing that I forgot to say earlier, which was in relation to the question about people having challenges navigating the systems, NDIS and Centrelink and all that type of stuff, is that your federal MP, one of their responsibilities is actually helping you do that. So one of the things that my office does every day is support people navigating those systems. And MPs often have and so you could call Lidia or I if you've got a particular challenge with NDIS or Centrelink or whatever it is. We can help navigate those systems and services for people. It's something that federal officers do for the federal systems. It's something that state MPs do for state systems, and so on and so on. So if there is something very kind of practical that we can help with, it is absolutely helping people navigate those systems. And I think it's one of those places where if you know, you know, and if you don't, then you kind of get left out. And lots of our mob actually don't know that they can do that. So it's a very practical thing to be able to tell people, is that if you're having trouble with Centrelink or whatever, getting on your payments, get in touch with us and we can help sort it out.
Thanks, Senator.
Actually, ring Jana's office. I don't have as many staff as the Labor Party.
Well, actually, we've all got the same stuff.
What we'll do, ladies, I ask if we can just focus here, and we'll pass over to Auntie Jill. Auntie Jill, just a reminder of the question that some of the Commonwealth key systems, NDIS, Centrelink, aged care, are notoriously hard to access. The question to the senators was how they would advocate for better social care systems and what are their priorities. What I'd like to hear from you, as someone who's really at the forefront in this area, is what are the key things that you are hearing from the community and how seriously is it impacting our mob here, at least in Victoria?
Well, I know for a fact that NDIS is a mess. I hear from Aboriginal people in Melbourne who have accessed that, but it's just a nightmare. So the fact that Jana has said that anyone can ring up the Senate and they'll help them navigate, we need to put that on our socials, VACCHO. If we can just put everyone's contact details, because that's what we're going to need. That would...
The federal MP for the area, whatever electorate they're in, you can contact your federal MP. If you're not getting any traction, then feel free to get in touch.
Yeah. The other thing in relation to aged care, as we all know, we've just come out of a Royal Commission into aged care. There's all these recommendations. They established an Aboriginal Aged Care Commissioner, an interim commissioner, to go out and talk to mob. Her report's now up on her website. It's got a lot of great recommendations. VACCHO supports the majority, all of her recommendations, but we're not 100% sure whether governments, no matter which government, will implement them, because it's going to cost too much money, basically. We've only in Victoria 2 aged care residential facilities, Aboriginal, and that we all know is Rumbalara, that's the biggest one, and we've got a small one here in Melbourne, ACES. A lot of the changes that are coming out in the new aged care legislation is forcing our mob to think like a for-profit organisation. That for-profit mentality is the way the Commonwealth Government, no matter who it is, I don't care which party's in, they all look for how can we make these services that we should be providing for our citizens, they've got to be for-profit. 2 services that we've got in Victoria wouldn't survive on a for-profit model because of the amount of bed base you need. It's anyways. So I think the NDIS is, and I'll be very respectful here and I won't swear, mucked up. The aged care, I think, needs a lot of advocacy, and if you all want to go and have a look at the Commissioner's report and her recommendations, if we implement them, we might achieve something for our mob in aged care.
Can I just add to the NDIS, Labor cut off anyone who has a criminal record, you don't get NDIS. So if you have a disability and you've been in jail or you've got a record, bad luck, no NDIS for you. They cut them off at the knees. So you can imagine how many of our mob that affects.
Thank you, ladies. We just have an opportunity for one more question from the audience. Up the back there, sure. Now, is this a question or a statement? Just wanted to clarify.
I'll
question?
make it a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Look, I just want to say, the issues you're talking about is huge. Not once did you mention in that whole process about the social services of the Commonwealth was early years. And actually the way they're funded in the early years space and the way we're supposed to compete with all these, talk about a for-profit, and actually the only time our children get any attention is when they're in the system, and there's nothing do you ever want to listen to, or the federal, or the states, or closing it, whatever else you're talking about, they don't listen to the changes we need to put forward on the positivity of our children and how we can make it better. The question I ask is that why can't you get together across the Aboriginal people in the federals and talk about the changes to how you fund Aboriginal early years across this country?
Just for your information, there was on the news today on the radio, they were talking about for-profit providers in the early years, and they reckon it's just gone haywire and they should stop for-profit funding.
And can I just say that will also...
Just wait till we get the microphone back to you.
We won't hear you otherwise.
Just so the folks at home can hear you.
The big trap is that you're getting more and more Aboriginal organisations wanting to open up early year centres, and it's dangerous and it's going to add to the burden of the closing the gap crap that we're talking about, because you're not looking at how you need to do early years separately and differently.
Yep.
And the only thing you want to fund in closing the gap in early years is welfare.
Yep.
All right, no, thanks, Aunt, appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the community? We have one over here with Cherie Lowe. I thought it was just a statement. I thought that had been responded to. Okay, no, that's fine. Can we just clarify the question very, very simply? And then, by the way, you will come back to that one.
Turn that around.
Was that funding for early years and support for early years?
What I was saying is actually, why can't you talk about coming together as Aboriginal people in Parliament, talk about looking at how you can fund Aboriginal early years separately and differently than the mainstream.
All right, so the question is, what could be done at a federal level to break out the funding for First Nations early years childcare? Okay. Say again?
Not follow the same.
Yep. Cool. All right, Senator Thorpe, did you want to take this on first?
Yeah, sure. Look, I just think we need to stop funding the police out of Closing the Gap money. We need to stop funding the police out of the National Indigenous Australians Agency that funded a police station in the Northern Territory, that funded police dogs. And we need to stop funding the NRL and the AFL and the Brisbane Broncos, who get millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars out of black money. Imagine how many services we could provide that are self-determined by our people for our people instead of funding people that have already got enough money.
Yeah, thank you.
I like that.
I was just going to say that I feel like I've spoken to you about this before, Lisa, and agree with what it is that you've said in terms of how we need to fund our early year services more sustainably and so that they suit the needs of our kids. I don't feel like that's news to anybody in this room. And I suppose one of the kind of very practical things that I've done in my position is create spaces for people like you to have conversations with decision makers and funders about what it is that our kids need. So I don't pretend to be the expert on early years, and I know how passionate you are about that. I agree. I think our kids deserve the very best, and that's where we build them at the very beginning. All the evidence is clear about how important the first 5 years are of our kids' lives, and the more support that we can give them early on through incredible Aboriginal early years services, the better. So I suppose for me, creating those spaces for leaders to have conversations with funders and decision makers is something that I've done for the last little while.
Senator Cox.
Can I just offer a couple of things that I would wholeheartedly support should we make minority government making this a priority? What I know as the chair of the Closing the Gap First Nations measuring outcomes in the Closing the Gap target of early childhood is that 40% of our children are behind when they hit school, and those, the index that measures the 5 domains, we are tracking 40% behind, and it's worse for our boys. It is absolutely worse for our boys. So we do need targeted funding, I completely agree, and we need to do business differently, because we know that when Aboriginal community control are at the forefront of that, driving the self-determination, thinking about what those services are, we get better outcomes. So we need to change that matrix, and we absolutely need the providers in that. I watched Four Corners last night and cried nearly the whole way through it as a mum who put her kids through childcare and then walked in and asked my kids, did anything happen to them while they were in daycare? Because I'd put my own kids in those situations where I knew that they were for-profit providers who were taking the money instead of giving the proper care to our kids. And as Aboriginal girls, having to explain that to them that, I was really concerned. And I think everybody across the country should be concerned, because exactly as you've said and as Aunt said here next to me, we cannot allow for profit to be put before the care of our children. It's too important. So I wholeheartedly support that.
Auntie Jill, I'll ask you to add a bit into the equation there just shortly, because we then have only time for one short question after that.
Look, can I say I just agree with what everyone said.
How conciliatory of you. Well done. Yeah.
Get rid of the for-profit.
Lisa, is that a good start to what you were responding to or asking before? Okay, we're seeing work happen here. We have time for one more question now. I believe Auntie Cherie Lowe had her hand up first.
My question is, there were over 300 languages pre-colonisation, And I'm wondering from yourselves and government, and we think about how important language is to our health and well-being, what are you going to do to invest in revitalisation of our language and culture? And I don't mean invest in a Western education system to teach language, but what are we going to do? What are you going to do to actually invest properly in language? It was one of the first things taken away from us through colonisation and one of the hardest things for us to get back.
Thanks, Cherie. Yeah, great question. Senator Stewart, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So I suppose the first thing to say is that kind of any work to revitalise, rebuild language for our mob is something that I really support, because I think you've kind of summed it up nicely. It was one of the first things taken away from us, and it's one of the hardest things it's been one of the hardest things to rebuild. And I don't have the particular number in front of me, but certainly there's been some investment in trying to revitalise First Nations languages from a federal perspective, and I know there are different things happening at state and territory levels too, but certainly there's been investment in it, and I can see the Commissioner down here saying it's a little bit, and there's just a lot more work to do on that front, and more investment that needs to happen so our mob and our kids can speak our language. Absolutely.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Thorpe.
This is where I agree with Jacinta Price. We need to go back to the language groups. You know, native title has destroyed us, and the whole point of native title was to destroy us, was to put a gammon colonial line and make us row over which side of the line and which river. Well, that's the deliberate act to divide us. We need to get rid of native title, and we need to go back to the language groups themselves, which is what Jacinta talks about. Listen to her closing the gap speech. I don't agree with everything that she says, but you need to listen to that closing the gap speech, because there's some elements of that speech that I 100% agree upon, and there are other elements that she's talking about that I also agree upon, and I think a lot of our people would agree if they, I know that she's horrible in a lot of areas, and there's a lot of areas I just do not support, but she's talking about getting back to the language groups. My native title groups, they don't even talk to me, and they are making decisions on my country, on my future, on my kids' future, and Japarang don't get a say. The Brabrulung and the Kratangalang don't get a say, because we've got these peak bodies that have all the say and get all the resources, and the language groups get nothing. And it's the language groups, the clans of the language groups, that are the ones getting taken away, getting locked up, ones who can't afford a feed. They're the poor cousins on the side that no one cares about. It's the peak bodies that I think are a bit of a problem here. And if you ask my grandmother, Elma Thorpe, who was part of NAHO, the National Aboriginal and Islander Health Organisation, before VACCHO came about, it was all about raising the local Aboriginal health service, the local community, not the peak body. Now, I'm seeing peak bodies across this country that are getting so much money, and our services on the ground are struggling. So peak bodies should be small, not conglomerates of their own. And the resources need to go out to the communities that are struggling, like Lake Tyers, like Bairnsdale, like Framlingham. You know, they're the poor cousins that are always missing out. We don't have an aged care facility. Shep does, Melbourne do. What about the rest of our people around Victoria? So that's my position. I know it's going to upset people, but as I said, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to speak truth.
Thanks so much indeed, Senator. Senator Cox.
Wholeheartedly support the revitalisation of language. I was in the National Cultural Policy inquiry talking about First Nations language. I was one of the only First Nations senators that was there asking, where is our language money? We send all of it to IATSIS, and we ask IATSIS to distribute that, and to now they've got infrastructure to have language centres across the country. I asked, how did you come to the conclusion about where those language centres would be built? And I believe there's none here in Victoria. So again, we've got people outside of the processes. There's no consultation, there's no informed decision making. There are languages dying every week, First Nations languages in this country, and the revitalisation of that comes from native speakers, people who still have language and were able to retain language, and we're able to pass it on to future generations. And that didn't happen in my instance. My family come from 5 generations of the stolen generation. So when I hear people speak language, it's powerful. It drives you to tears, because you don't have that mother tongue. That's so important around how we can learn about the environment, how we know about our identity, how we know our connection to our kinship and our culture and our ways of learning, knowing and being, because that's who we are. It's all of it ingrained in that. I have an idea that, I'm just putting it out there, that we can have a language commissioner, a national language commissioner that actually takes this forward on a more consistent basis. What we're doing is sort of shelving it under everything else that's cultural policy. That includes media, it includes arts, it includes everything. Our music performers get more money than languages, First Nations languages do in this country, and I've got nothing against our musos, but actually we need to put investment into that. We need to have dual naming in every city. We do it during NAIDOC week, they do it on national news, but you don't see it any other time. That's everyone learning language as well as us, and embracing and revitalising our language. And I agree with Lidia, this needs to come from a grassroots movement. It cannot be led by peaks, but there's a way to do that as a systemic approach that actually can be built on the back of truth-telling and treaty. So that's the simple answer for me.
Thanks so much. I'm also going to ask Auntie Jill if she wouldn't mind yielding the floor. We do have one final question from the Commissioner, and I've got 5 minutes left. So, Commissioner, no, by all means, please. Can we get a microphone to Commissioner Lovett, please?
Am I going to have a say?
I was asking if you would yield the floor, and you said yes.
No,
but if you don't want to yield the floor, that's
I
okay.
don't.
That's okay. He's your countryman.
No, I'm not
He's
giving
your
it up.
countryman.
Yeah, no, I'm not giving it up.
Hold on a second,
I
Torres.
don't think I can sit here and cop the peak body comments in relation to both Senator Cox and Senator Thorpe. If it wasn't for this peak body, you wouldn't be here having a platform tonight. That's one. If it wasn't for this peak body, our 3 little pissy little RTOs in Victoria wouldn't have recently got $3 million each. If it wasn't for this peak body, we wouldn't have a voice at all in this state with state governments. So I agree. There needs to be more resources for on the ground, but not at the expense of a voice. So I disagree with that 100%. And if it wasn't for this peak body, 5 of our small services on the ground would have folded. So we support all our smaller services so they don't get in the trouble, so they get more funding. I don't see any black politician doing that. Now you can have the floor, Commissioner.
Thanks, Auntie Jill.
I think I didn't know where that response was going to go, so maybe given the 5 minutes left, maybe just a minute of optimism and hope from each person. I think we talked a lot about some pretty deep stuff here tonight, so what's your optimism and hope for our people and also the people listening in?
I think it's a great idea. Thanks so much indeed, Commissioner. Senator Cox, will start with you, then to Senator Stewart, Senator Thorpe, and of course Auntie Jill.
Thank you, Travis, for your question. I think the hope and optimism that I have is that there comes a time in future generations when we actually can understand the journey that we've been on, the journey that was sophisticatedly constructed for us as blackfellas in this country, and that journey has had so many challenges, and so many challenges for us at an individual level, at a collective level, and particularly at a national level. So we're trying to do square peg round hole stuff that constantly is driving us into a deficit narrative. Now, I spend a lot of time on social media, and I always get told don't read the comments, but I feel like we're continually in this vacuum with ourselves, and that the red ants in a jar being shook up and attacking each other is the thing that has to stop. My hope and my want for the next few generations of our children and our grandchildren is that we get to a collective understanding of that we need to fight the system. We need to break down a system that has been created for us. It's not been created by us. And the system needs to be the thing we fight collectively, rather than fighting each other, rather than trying to tear each other down. And understand that there are systems and structures that have been built that people will see their journeys at different levels. So I'm here sitting in front of you all as a community, Victorian, very proud Victorian First Nations community, and I do that humbly, and I really respect that. And thank you for welcoming me. And I think what my aspiration is to make sure that all of the communities across Australia understand the power that they do have. The power is in the people. It's not with the system. It's the way we respond to that system and the things we do to challenge it. And we've used two things to do that. We've constantly used our active resistance to do that. There are activists across this country that constantly do that. And we've survived it. We use our resilience every single day because it's damn hard to get out of bed. And some days are harder than others. And some challenges are bigger than others. But my hope is that bit by bit, together, we can use our collective power to make that change.
Thanks, Senator. And I will just point out to the remaining speakers, I'm sorry, we do have very, very short time constraints.
That's a good time.
Senator Stewart.
Thank you. I suppose the kind of the positive or kind of optimism for me is to know that actually the majority of our families are doing okay. That there's obviously a number of our families who are doing it tough, but overwhelmingly our families are doing okay. And I think that's important to kind of say in the broader sense. I can't remember I don't know what the statistics are now, but I remember years ago when I worked at VACCHO, we talked about actually 80% of our families are doing okay. It's a 20% that are have that kind of interaction with the system that are really struggling. That's who we're helping. But they take up a lot of the conversation that we have as a state and as a country, but actually most of our families are doing okay. The other thing that I would say is that, more and more of our mob are buying their own homes. More and more of our mob are starting their own businesses. There's been a 50% growth in Aboriginal businesses across the country. That's pretty deadly. So mob are seeing the opportunity to use their culture, their skills, their knowledge to really just dive in deep to the business space, and that's creating intergenerational wealth for them and their families, which is actually pretty deadly to see. More and more of us are taking up further education, whether that's through universities or whether that's through free TAFE. So I feel like they're all really great things to give us some hope. And like I said, I think there is much more of a narrative to entrench about what it is we contribute to our economy. When you think about $16.1 billion from Aboriginal businesses generated in revenue every year, 116,000 people employed from First Nations businesses every year, that is the town of Bendigo that our mob employ from our black businesses. That's pretty deadly. We're 100 times more likely to employ our mob if we're in business. And we pay $4.2 billion in wages across our businesses. They are not small statistics, and they should be screamed from the rooftops about what it is we're contributing to this nation.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Thorpe.
Geez, I must be hanging out with the wrong people. Well, Chelsea Wattigo says, fuck hope. If you haven't read Another Day in the Colony, I suggest you read it. We're sick of hope as blackfellas. Over 200 years, we've been hoping that things get better, hoping. I want to see that we don't assimilate into the colonial structures. I want to see that our children are strong, resilient, they grow up knowing who they are, where they come from, and they never assimilate or bow to the oppressor. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing some strong activists coming through, but I'm also seeing some people that prefer to go the white way. And we have to bring them fellas back in to be able to maintain ourselves as Aboriginal people in this country. Otherwise, assimilation is another way of getting rid of us. And we need a treaty, not a state treaty, not one with the governments here. We need a treaty that is internationally scrutinised. If we look at the VIC Treaty, it's bound by two pieces of legislation: the cultural heritage legislation, where they are allowed to log, they are allowed to mine the Mitchell River, which they're about to do, and every other river in this country. That's a problem. And also the Traditional Owner Settlement Act. You cannot override those two pieces of legislation with the current treaty in this state. We don't want to be bound by any rules in a treaty when we go to a national process. It has to be with the colonising king. That's why I told him off. That come from our ancestors, and that's where we have to go. An internationally scrutinised treaty so that we get land back. Not a holiday, not a free day that we call Treaty Day. We want land back. And we want them to stop killing our people and taking our children away and destroying our land and water. That's what I want to see in the future, and I think that's what we all should be contributing to.
Thanks, Senator. And the last word, Auntie Jill,
To you.
Well, it's a long list, but I agree with what everyone else has said, but I actually think my aspirations is that I would like to see that every Aboriginal family is allowed to grow, allowed to create wealth, that First Peoples of this country finally takes our rightful place in this country, and we have a very strong, powerful voice at the Commonwealth level. Yes, it would be ideal to have a sovereign treaty with the Commonwealth or the King, whoever it is. I don't care, so long as we get one. But I actually think that wealth creation for us as a people is really important. But more than anything, our connection to our country, our culture, and all our burais get to grow up strong in their culture and not in homes.
Thanks, Aunt. Please join me, everybody, in saying thanks to Senator Lidia Thorpe, Senator Jana Stewart, Senator Dorinda Cox and Auntie Jill Gallagher. I personally wish to thank everybody here for being so respectful. It has been an evening of incredibly insightful views and inputs. I think we've all got something we can take away and learn, regardless of your political leaning. I certainly have, and my eyes have been opened in a number of interesting areas. Also, I want to thank everybody for coming along, for being respectful, for participating, for VACCHO, for the Centre of Excellence for Aboriginal Families Wellbeing and Clothing the Gaps for putting on this event. Many, many thanks to you, and also to the Deadly 3K&D for broadcasting this, and to all the amazing VACCHO staff who've been doing such a deadly job on this and other election question time projects. It's a very important opportunity that we get to ask our political leaders, whether at local, state and federal, those questions that are burning to us. To all of you, and of course to the Aborigines Advancement League for letting us use this amazing and important venue. To all of you, I ask that you think before you vote. Vote with your conscience and vote with thought. Take care tonight and respect to everyone. Thank you.